Hello, everyone. Welcome to this discussion today, where I'm joined by Phil Chynoweth, a international business expert. Phil's a partner in Ventures International Group, and we're going to talk about a number of issues. First of all, a conversation we had last week on a Zoom presentation with a professor from the UCLA, University of California. And then Phil's also going to comment on the UCLA GAP benefit program that is run in Australia for people to participate at UCLA. How are you today, Phil?
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Good, thanks.
It was good to have you join us on that session last week. The main purpose of that session was to talk about what the likely impact of COVID has been on business and what we can expect over the next few years as people, as CEOs, and also maybe accountants and lawyers and service providers looking after our clients. And what are the signs? Nobody really knows, but obviously there are the signs and indications there. And Terry's session, which I'll provide a link to you, Peter. You can put it on your site. It's about 20 minutes, but it's worthwhile listening to. Terry is an adjunct professor at UCLA, but has spent time at Harvard. But more importantly, he's fundamentally a businessman. He ran Vodafone in America. He's had a number of senior business positions as well as on boards. And his role at the Eastern Center at UCLA is really looking into the future. What are the changes that are happening within society that are going to impact not only people generally in the community, but also businesses. So that's the context for the discussion.
Okay, but one of the comments that I found very interesting, virtually at the beginning of the presentation last week, was the comments about what is likely to emerge in the world over the next 12 to 24 months. And a comparison was made back to the end of the Spanish flu back in 1919.
Well, that's right. Peter, you're probably one of the few people that remember what was happening back in 1919.
Yes, a long time ago.
There are a number of articles. In fact, I will draw attention to, there's an article in Forbes magazine. In fact, I'll just have a quick look at it. I've got it on the screen here, but I'll send the link so that if people haven't actually seen it, but they were drawing a parallel between the Spanish flu in the late 1919, 1919, and then the period of absolute economic growth. And we all remember, that's when Ford really accelerated, when the silent movies really boomed. And this is obviously before the big crash in 1929, which
we weren't going to talk about
that. We don't. But I think that what they were trying to do is draw some parallels between, well, what does that really mean? And in fact, the discussion that Terry had and the points that he drew were not that anything new innovation is going to happen in this period. It's more the acceleration of change. The adoption by companies of new technologies has increased from years to months. And this is the fundamental thing. The changes that we're seeing are more, we've seen video conferencing before, we've seen online shopping before. What we saw that over the period of COVID-19 when we were in lockdown was the absolute incredible increase in use of online technologies, and the fact that that has accelerated, not that it's been new, but people who would never have thought of actually using codes or getting online to shop or basically looking at the plethora of movies. And now there's most of the population is well across it, and in fact quite prefer to use those forms of doing commerce or getting services than actually getting out of their house. So those are some of the points that Terry makes in the video. But more importantly, he talks about what does that mean for us as business managers and for our clients within certain industries. And I think the key thing that he comes through, and it's worthwhile noting, is that we've got a two-paced economy. There are businesses which have absolutely boomed during this period, whereas others, tourism, airlines, the ones that we know, are actually still suffering significantly. And yes, they will come back to some extent, but will they come back to where they were? The predictions are in the video that basically business travel will reduce by, airline business travel will reduce by about 40%. And that won't come back. And I think that's largely due to the efficiencies and the fact now that people are quite comfortable with the idea of doing Zoom calls like we're doing now. You know, in the past, Peter might have called a town hall session in each of the states and we would bring you in. Now we're very, very comfortable and prefer to have these sort of sessions. Now, seems obvious, but ultimately now it's different between us as professionals doing it, but now we've got 80% of the population doing it, which is a major change.
Yes,
so
and
the rolling implications of that and how that filters through society and the supporting industries, we've got to see what happens. You know, things aren't necessarily that obvious. So it's that's why he said you need to put your finger on the pulse. You need to be watching what's going on, because if it starts happening, it'll happen quickly, and probably more quickly than a lot of businesses realise.
Phil, one of his interesting comments was, which is of great interest to me, was his emphasis that there will be a shift to data. What do you think he meant by that?
That's a good question. I think that along with that, he also said there will be a move away from hardware to software. Now, I think what he means is, and I don't think it's a more broader statement. We used to go shopping. We'd go to school to go and get education. We'd go to work to go and do our work. We'd go to the movie theatre to go to the movie theatre. Now, for example, if people are investing in hardware or in the capital items around those things, they're probably missing an opportunity where they should be really investing in online versions in the virtual world, and the fact that people are doing things from distance. And this is the concept of remote. The other point he made was that the expectations that from business owners was that majority of people would go back to work as they had before. If you then look at the surveys in the US about employees, about what they expect to do, 60% to 80% viewed that they would not be going back to full-time work, and they would maintain a hybrid environment. Now, this is really interesting in terms of how you would monitor and how you would manage. And those are the information around that, and being able to track what's happening in the world so you understand where to put your dollars. Because if you're starting to invest in movie theaters or you start to invest in shopping centers and commercial real estate, I'd be a little bit concerned about it at the moment because of the changes that we're starting to see. We can feel it. We just don't know whether it's actually going to go back to how it was. And I think the predictions are, from what Terry was saying, it's probably not. Because ultimately now we've got another challenge for business owners is where people, the average person in the street, is a major stakeholder, and employees have a little bit more power than they had before in terms of what they say they want, whether they want their company to be green and use, recycling and those sort of things are starting to happen, and they're starting to be much more vocal about it. And so not only when I'm going to put my vote in, in the next election, I think there's going to be pressure on business owners along those sort of lines, as well as where the people want to work and also the employees wanting to have a say.
And Phil, during all this, we've also seen social media taking probably a bigger role, but also a role that's come under some scrutiny, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to this the distributed democracy now, where we're finding that the people are feeling quite empowered. You think about the rise of the anti-vaxxers. Now, there was always probably conspiracy theorists and people who, for very good reason, and we shouldn't judge, but very good reason why they don't want to be vaccinated. But still they're there. Now, that's something that probably has always been there, but we're very aware of them now. And I think what's happened now is we're much more aware of the fractions within society, and obviously that's going to have an impact for business owners as well in terms of how they consider to keep the business going, keep people motivated, and also understand what people's concerns are, apart from the pragmatics of about having people who are not vaccinated within their businesses, for example.
But looking at overall what Professor Kramer had to say, my observation, listening to him and watching him on the video, was that he's quite positive as to where at least the Western world is going in the near future. Would you agree?
I think you have to be optimistic, and I think most people are reasonably optimistic, but you need to be aware of the impact of change and the pace of change. And I think that's just more of a consideration than we probably had back in 1919 before the pandemic hit us. You know, that pace of change and those issues were always there, but I think we're finding ourselves in the new normal. And there are very good reasons, for example, that you don't have that point of continuity now. You're basically starting again in some ways in terms of when people coming back, and now the commerce is starting to build up, that you actually make those changes now as opposed to waiting in a year's time.
Yes. And one of you referred to it before, but that example where he gave that prior to February 2020, a project might have taken 6 years to finalise. In this last 20 months, been done in 6 months. So that's showing the pace of change, isn't it?
Yeah, and that adoption and people's appetite for change. People expect it now, I think, because now, just back to the example, where now people who may not have ever thought of doing video conferencing but now, you know, the whole echelons of society from all age groups, now that was the only way that they could keep in contact with their families and friends. And you look at, you know, I know from my own point of view, I probably have 2 or 3 business interviews and Zoom calls to about 10 private ones. People hungering for getting together. I noticed that also people are feeling a little bit awkward now when we're having to deal with getting back to be in groups of people in reality. It's It's like people have been in jail for around about 2 months and they're feeling a bit awkward.
Okay, well, I live in North Queensland, so that's a little bit different because.
Well, you're in jail all the time, then, aren't you, Peter?
we had a 3-day lockdown in Townsville, and that was it. But yes, I sympathise with our colleagues in Melbourne and Sydney and other parts of Australia who have had these long lockdowns. I've been talking to some of my contacts, accountants, and other people in those cities, and I can understand some of the stress they've been under in trying to keep their households together, homeschooling, which I think would be an enormous challenge for most of us, and trying to do their work for their clients. So they've had to persevere under some severe difficulties.
I think there was always a good statement. I think it was Michael Caine who said that with his acting roles, if he came up against a difficulty, that he'd try and use that difficulty in terms of trying to improve his performance. And I think part of the challenge we've got is understanding what the changes are and the difficulties that they present, but try to work out how to turn those things around to an advantage. And when I'm working with companies, primarily I work with companies that are getting ready for exporting and setting up subsidiaries overseas. It's even more important for companies to look before they leap, have a good understanding about what changes are happening in the markets that they're moving to. If they're already exporting and already developing markets offshore, it's important that you have a good perspective and understanding about the changes that are going to happen, because they're often happening quickly, and also there are some advantages and opportunities to be made and to be had.
Okay, well, that's, I think, a very good point to move into a discussion on the UCLA Gap Field Study program. I've known you for a long time. In fact, I think I've enjoyed a couple of dinners in meetings in Sydney with some of our Californian colleagues over the years. And this is a very interesting program, Phil. So Can you tell us what it's about and what are the benefits for Australian businesses to be involved?
UCLA was one of the first universities around the world, actually, to basically set up capstone programs, which are basically market research programs, which they take a company and use that company as a case study for their 6-month final year thesis. And primarily it started out at UCLA for part of their innovation group within the Anderson Business School. And this school basically has had a number of people go through, the founders of Google, for example, and a lot of the tech startups actually have been through the Anderson Business School and are known for their focus on innovation and innovative thought. They're part of a number of incubators, including the Disney incubator, and there's a number of other incubators, including the Clean Tech incubator there in LA. So they're very much involved in that innovation sector within the community, and they have a lot of the alumni, and also the faculty are actually business people more than they are academics. And part of what they're looking at and have looked at over the last 30 years is how they interact with companies, one, for interesting projects and market research projects, as well as basically keeping up to date with what are the changes in technologies primarily that are happening around the world. So we've put 90 companies through the UCLA programs, the field study programs. I've put through 60 in my time because I've been there since early 2000s. And I find it's a very useful program because the companies can actually ask specific questions of a 360-degree review of what are my competitors doing? Who are my likely customers? Who are my channel partners that I should be using? And you get a team of 6 people who are neutral, who basically have the industry expertise, but they can go and ask questions that no one else can because they have the UCLA card. And also they can basically find out information that's very difficult if you went through IDP or some of the standard market research companies, which have a big database. And the other part of it, which I think is the real benefit, is that the company owners, when they start to look at exporting, you're going through a pretty steep learning curve. You don't want to admit it, but you are. It's like you're in a startup again, and it's quite threatening. So you need to understand, well, I now need to get a beachhead. I now need to understand more about these markets that I want to get into. And I need to start to build more confidence in my management team that I can actually manage this, as opposed to saying, I know a guy in LA who knows all the companies and I'll work with them. The companies that have gone for a quick fix, or I know a guy, end up having a very bad time. So the companies need to understand exactly what the challenges are. American investors, which we've had a number of companies which have been invested in, and they're still in the valley, in Silicon Valley. The American investors will almost demand that the CEO and senior executives spend time and make a commitment if they want to go to America. And it's like a lot of markets, people not necessarily interested in working with companies and investing in companies if there isn't a solid commitment. So you get a good understanding through this program, not only about the hard facts about the market, but the soft facts, which is, Americans think very differently to us. They also have a very different view of us, and you need to understand that. And to think that you do understand that off the bat is a big mistake. Not actually employing and engaging a lead that's American in an American venture is a big mistake. And we often make that mistake. In the same way, it's more so than probably in Europe and also in Asia. However, you do need to think very carefully about the people you hire to make sure that you're building a good solid base. So those are the things we do. And part of that, we get a lot of, it's not for every company, but we use UCLA pretty freely because, one, it's very cost effective. It's $20,000. And most other market research activities cost you well into $100,000 and plus. You actually learn a lot about the business in the US and also about the way that business is done, because you're dealing with the faculty, you're dealing with the latest up-to-date ways in which strategies are developed, and the basic theories and concepts and the information. You get access to all of the market research through the Anderson libraries. So most of the companies that you would pay a lot of money for just basically go and get a lot of the market research papers that are already in existence. You get that part of the deal. So there are some very good reasons why, if you're really wanting to get to understand a market very well, that the UCLA program is a good option to consider. It's not the only option, but it's certainly a good option to consider. And I use it reasonably well. As I said, we've put through about 60 companies, and 90 companies in Australia have been through the program, and we've got people who'd be happy to give a good reference for it. They also work with Finland and a number of other countries. There's about 12 countries around the globe. New Zealand use it heavily. New Zealand are much better at exporting. They're a small country, but they punch way above their weight, as do Finland. And they use the UCLA program. They put through about 20 to 30 companies a year.
Gee, do they? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the main reason is we've got a bit of an issue in Australia where we have, as you know, we've got our commercialisation programs through industry, and we've got our export and through Austrade. In New Zealand, they've basically got that within the one government group. So they look after industry development and exporting as one of the things, so they go hand in hand. And so most companies and technology companies, I would assume in Australia, would have to think about having an export market development if they've got IP, because it's difficult to try and justify and be competitive if you're just going to work in one market. Yeah. So New Zealand understand that very well, and they really use the program to a great deal.
A company that wants to be involved, how many of their team would be involved? And do they spend 6 months in California? Is that the idea?
No. What happens is you basically have a team of 5 or 6 professionals, and they people are normally in the workforce. So they're part of Fortune 500 companies, and they select companies based on the fact that their industry knowledge. But you'll get a person who's a marketing person, a finance person, a CEO, business strategist style. And so you've got a good mix of skills already there that have been out in the marketplace and working, and now the companies are putting them through their MBA basically for management development purposes. So you're not dealing with young people. So there is a kickoff week where you will go for a few days, or during COVID, it was basically obviously through a Zoom call. But you go to LA, you go to Los Angeles, you spend 2 or 3 days with the team, basically agreeing the scope of the project that you require and the questions you need answered, and also the actual events, because a lot of the marketing events and trade fairs and other things that are going on in a number of industries that you would like to attend and you want the team to attend. So you work through that with them, and then you basically get a signed agreement in terms of what the outcomes would be, that you're happy that you're getting the information you need. They then go away. You basically have probably a catch-up 2 hours each week just on progress. The team then comes out to visit you and spends a week with you and your company, your clients, and just to get to know the current environment, because really what they're doing is they're comparing your progress and your current business models and how you're succeeding in Australia, and looking at how comparable that is in the markets that you want to get to. So that would be, they don't necessarily dominate your time when they come out, because they're out talking to clients and everything, but it's a time for them to talk to members of the company that are relevant. And then there is a midpoint review, which would get a summary of what the findings are. That gives you an opportunity of, if there's other bits of information you need, you can actually retask the team to go and tunnel in. Often there are times when the team comes back and says, look, it just doesn't look like it's what you wanted. The market isn't there, or there's too many competitors. Then that provides you an opportunity to then basically take another tack to basically make sure you're getting something of value. And then in December is the final presentation. Now, the final presentation is a presentation which you get and a report, and then they present that to a team of experts, which are industry people, CEOs, part of the Anderson Alumni Network. So you might get, for example, the head of Google as one of the members, but basically what they do is they listen to it, they talk with the team, and then they talk with you about really what their views are, but it's really valuable input. Some companies basically have been able to source a reasonable amount of investment dollars from the report. It is an investment grade report that you get. And often during that process, they identify potential investment groups that would be interested in your company. So there's a way of actually using that Southern California network of companies and investment groups, which is really useful for some companies.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the costs, because that'll be a question I'm sure some people bring up. So it's an initial, it's $20,000 fee, and there's obviously some traveling and accommodation in people going to California.
Yeah, so under the EMDG program, you can claim $50,000 for market research activities. So the $20,000 is 20 US. We can, depending on the type of amount of travel, the money's for the travel for the team. So that you're basically funding the ability for the team to travel and go out and talk to the people that you need.
That's covered in the $20,000.
That's right. That's covered in the $20,000. So, for example, we've done projects which are up in China. For example, there was a pharmaceutical company that we did some work, Australian pharmaceutical company that we did some work in China, for example. They had Chinese speakers on the team, and so there was an allowance for additional money, but basically that's where the money goes. Yes, you will need to arrange probably 2 people to go to the kickoff and 2 people to go to the final presentation. And also you've got accommodation there. It'd be a waste of a trip if you didn't basically use that time to actually catch up with potential partners, clients, and other influencers while you're there. So I would allow for $50,000 for the whole program. I assist the companies if they need in terms of some of the project management, and so that I can talk with them a little bit about that. But if we certainly put it in, we put these through as EMDG eligible expenses, so you get 50% of that back.
Now, the EMDG, that's very good that we've got onto that, because the rules are changed for this new financial year. The companies now have to apply in advance, and the first round of applications close on the 30th of November. Is that right? Your understanding of it?
Yes, that's right.
So if someone wanted information about this whole program, to submit that application to Austrade, they could contact you to get the details. Is that right?
Yes, yes. And also we offer another service, part of, well, I'm associated with Ventures International in Singapore, but my business here in Australia is a company called Bridge Global, which works with companies to identify basically initial plans for their export part side of their business. So we help people bridge to a successful market entry and also successful businesses offshore. So we have a checklist, basically working with those 60 companies. You get, we've got a little analytic platform which goes through to highlight the key things that you need to be focusing on so you can avoid the common pitfalls. And through that checklist and a short consultation, we can actually work out, here's where you need to be spending the money in terms of your next 12 to 18 months. And we can then basically put that in as part of your EMDG grant application, so you know that you got yourself covered. Because it's not only the market research, it's also the idea of whether you need to actually hire somebody locally, what other things that you need to do in terms of making sure that you prepare yourself and you get a good start, and making sure that you've got yourself covered with an EMDG grant.
Okay. What sort of companies are the Australian applicants? Are they startups, or they already got a reasonable turnover?
It's a pretty good mix, but you'd have to assume that you've got to be cash flow positive in most circumstances. But there are technology companies, for example, that have a significant amount of investment, and their next stage of development is, say, go to Silicon Valley and get themselves ready for the next stage, a Series B, for example, or a Series A in the Valley, to basically build the company up to a stage where it's ready. So depending on the technology path, as you know, Peter, because you work with a number of them, there are a number of different funding courses that a company needs to go through. But normally we would assume that one, they could afford to cover the costs, or with the help from an EMDG grant, because often it costs a lot more than people realise, and you need to basically make sure that you're not going to hurt or hinder the business in Australia in order to grow your business offshore. You want to make sure that you keep everything in balance.
Okay. How can accountants assist their clients as facilitators, or being able to introduce them through to you and then to UCLA?
Well, I tend to. The accountants have got the relationship with the clients, a very trusted relationship, and that's primary and very important. I provide some adjunct services to support that relationship development, so that we can actually identify the key things that an organisation will need to do. And the idea then, if you have a number of clients, as I'm sure some of you do, overseas, that you have obviously partner service providers, tax agents and others, so that you can help facilitate the development, because it gets quite complex in terms of the tax rules and also the company arrangements that you'd need to have in some of the offshore countries. Whether you need to set up in Singapore, if you're looking at Asia, whether you set up in Singapore and Hong Kong, bit of a moot point at the moment.
Yes.
But ultimately, how would you set yourself up in Asia if you wanted to basically start to develop the markets there? Good question, a lot of change, but you need to have good partners on board. And those are the type of relationships that are important for accountants here if they want to maintain a good relationship with their clients, but also maintain the value over time.
Yes, and help their client add value.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, thank you very much for that. And you're going to send me some links to a video, and
Yes.
we'll be able to forward that to our subscribers and to other accountants that we communicate with on an ongoing basis. So hopefully they will be able to make contact with you. Do you just want to tell our listeners at this stage your contact details, please?
Yeah, sure. And I'll give you the links, and I'll send through the contacts so that it'll be there for when the video goes out. I think it's important to stress a number of accountants will be actually doing EMDG grant applications for their clients. So my focus is not necessarily the EMDG grant applications, but I certainly help companies make sure that they're prepared and they're asking for the right things. I certainly can submit. I'm an EMDG consultant, but that's not my primary focus. It's mainly on facilitating getting the right plans in place, and also in the countries that are overseas, that there is a soft landing for companies.
Okay, Phil. Well, thank you very much today for giving us some insight into what Professor Kramer was talking about in his very interesting address. And the link you're going to send us includes parts of that. Yes. And also this very important information on the UCLA GAP field study program, because I'm sure that around Australia, there's got to be quite a number of companies that could avail themselves of that opportunity. So thank you very much for that information.
Thanks, Peter. Really appreciate it.
Stay safe and look after yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you.